Chapter 20 of Sedition, Part 2. The mining colony had gone deathly silent. If not for the information from her pinging, Twilight might have thought that she'd been too late. The halls were marred by the gaping entry wounds left behind by the tunneling spiders. Twisted steel and brass blocked the path in many places, and loose rubble strewn along the floor made it difficult to walk with ease. Where before the screams of ponies and the shrieks of spiders had echoed off the rock, now there was only the constant hissing of steam and the trickling of water. She frowned as she looked down, her horn light reflecting off of the thin stream of water coursing over the stone under the metal grid of the floor. She could smell the blood mixed into it, dripping down from the dismembered bodies left abandoned in dark corners. The pumps, the steady breathing of the mountain that had first entranced her on her arrival, sounded different.
The mountain's flooding.
Midnight said nothing. They could have teleported across the entire colony in an instant, but Twilight felt that doing so may only further frighten the miners. It also would have felt wrong, somehow, to fling herself through the arcane, to blink past the death and destruction caused by her presence as if it wasn't even there. So they crossed the colony on hoof, and Twilight made sure not to shy away from the ruin waiting for her behind every corner. Even on hoof, it didn't take long for them to climb the nearest stairwell. She paused on the landing, turning back to Skilla.
Stay here.
The spider stared at her blankly. Twilight took a few experimental steps backward before nodding to herself, satisfied that her message had been conveyed. The walls of the top floor were dark and craggy, without any of the metal panels or piping that were such a constant throughout the rest of the colony. If not for the bits of old refuse left in the corners, broken lamps, scattered shards of clay, and rusted tools, there would be no way to tell the ponies lived here. There were only a few rooms on this level, all attached to a single hallway, and all but one was empty. She stopped before the door, looking down at the small band of light flickering beneath it. With a glance towards midnight, she summoned a shield, raised her hoof, and pushed the door open. Fire! Thunder filled her ears, and Twilight winced back at the spray of lead that bounced off her shield. A line of 6 ponies carrying bulky shields rushed through the gun smoke, followed with a second line pointing long spears between the front ranks, and Twilight frowned as the weapons cracked and shattered on impact with her shield. The miners stumbled to a stop, those in the front regarding their broken spears with wide eyes, while those in the back raced to reload spent guns. Midnight stalked across the line with a disdainful sneer.
A pitiful effort.
Twilight arched a brow.
You're not upset? I'd have thought you'd be calling for blood by now. Normally, yes.
Midnight smirked, giving Twilight a sideways look.
But we cannot coerce corpses into friendship.
Twilight blinked. That wasn't exactly the right idea, but it was an improvement, she supposed. She turned her attention back to the assembled miners, taking in their frightened expressions. The room was wide but low, and she could see ponies hiding in the dark corners to either side, probably thinking she couldn't see them. The only light came from a few lamps hung from posts stabbed into the walls. Twilight kept her eyes forward as she offered a tentative smile.
It's safe now. There's nothing to be afraid of.
They exchanged nervous glances amongst each other in silence. Behind the line, Twilight heard some pony curse as they dropped something.
Is Pony Burrows available?
She asked, raising her voice.
Or maybe Bag End?
Go away! One stallion brandished the jagged tip of his broken spear at her. "You've done enough!" Midnight stepped up to the stallion, looking into his eyes.
Perhaps we could kill just one. I'm sure they wouldn't mind.
Twilight pursed her lips. She was just considering how best to phrase her apology and farewell when a commotion from further into the room caught her attention. Bag End stepped around the line, followed by Peony Burrows. He had a lamp hanging from a small clip on the side of his belt. "Let's talk outside." Twilight smiled.
Of course.
She stepped out of the doorway, holding it open with her magic to allow the two ponies to follow her through. Peony eyed the glowing door with open suspicion, while Bag End seemed to be tired more than anything else. Twilight went to close the door, only for Peony to jar it open with a hind leg.
Don't close it. Oh, okay.
Twilight stepped back a respectful distance before letting her magic fizzle out. The only light came from Bag End's lamp, a small sphere of washed-out color in Twilight's otherwise ashen world. Midnight stood in the background, its purple eyes glowing with reflected light.
What do you want from us?
Peony asked, her eyes hard. Twilight grimaced.
I just want to help. I've sent the spiders away, so you don't have to hide up here anymore. Oh, you've sent the spiders away, huh?
Peony snorted.
Excuse me if I don't trip over myself to thank you for only killing some of us. It was an accident.
Twilight sat down with a heavy sigh, hanging her head.
I didn't mean for any pony to be hurt. What you mean makes little difference for our dead,
Peony said coldly.
What do we have to do to make you leave us alone? If you want me to go, just ask and go.
Peony stomped a hoof.
And never come back.
She whipped around, her tail flicking out, and shoved the door open. She disappeared through it, leaving Midnight standing in her place.
As I expected.
Strangely, Twilight felt only a detached disappointment. Maybe this was the outcome she'd been expecting all along. Had it been foolish of her to hope that these ponies would show any gratitude for saving them from a threat she herself had caused? That they'd show anything but disdain? Yes, it was. And she didn't need Midnight to tell her that. She had known since she first found these ponies, in those thoughts that she hadn't dared put into words, that this was the only outcome. She wasn't like them. And this attempt at reliving her old existence, however forced and impossible it would have been, had always been doomed to fail. Twilight looked up to Bag End, who was watching her with a thoughtful frown.
I'm sorry.
He nodded. I believe you. Twilight gave him a small smile, and for once she didn't cringe back at the way his eyes darted down to her fangs. Was she accepting her fate, or just growing numb to it?
Some of the pipes are broken, and I noticed the water's flowing back in. I could help you fix it.
Thanks, but no thanks. He shook his head. It'll be rough, but the maintenance team can jury-rig a solution for now. Corporate will send engineers to handle the rest. He shrugged, a wry smile tugging at his lips. It'll probably be the first upgrade this facility's had since it was built.
Are you sure?
Twilight asked.
I understand you wouldn't want my help, but if you make any mistakes...
We can evacuate the colony if we have to. Bag End sighed as he turned to the door, looking back at her over his shoulder. I don't know how you got in, but I trust you can find your way out. Thanks for not leaving us to die, I guess. He slipped out of the hall, taking his light with him. Twilight was left alone, surrounded by dark stone, with only Midnight's bloodied lavender coat to break the ashen grayscale of her muted vision. Midnight eyed her with a level gaze.
We should go. Yes, I suppose we should.
Twilight's horn glowed as she stood, and she reached a hoof up to feel at the cold metal of Celestia's tiara slung around her neck.
The frozen north awaits.
The siege camp around Friesland had grown significantly since the last time Anna saw it. Tents and banners littered the hillsides, protected from the wind by their bulk. A crunchy layer of snow covered the ground, piled up into miniature walls around the tents and the most trafficked paths. Thin white powder swirled through the air, kicked up by marching soldiers and carried by the wind to sting at Anna's eyes. And the sound of shouted orders competed with the rhythmic bass of marching hooves and the sharp clatters and clangs of the smiths and the carpenters hard at work. Banners and colored tents demarcated the borders between the encamped armies, with the soldiers mostly keeping to themselves. But there were some places where they were mixed. One such place was the long healer's tent near the middle of the camp, pitched next to the paved road that led through the thin line of trees to the west and towards the besieged city. It was bigger than it had been before, but no less busy. She watched as a pony pulled a small wagon laden with supplies up to the side, only for it to be emptied in seconds by a swarm of nurses. Anna frowned. Was that a bear lumbering out of the tent? She shook her head, setting the matter aside. If she wasn't hallucinating from blood loss, and it actually was a bear, then she wanted to get in and get herself seen to before it came back. She made for the tent at a brisk trot, nosing through the closed flaps and narrowing her eyes as she searched for a healer to attend to her. She wanted someone experienced, unlikely to balk at her appearance, and quick enough that she could be on her way without too much delay. She had a deadline to meet, and she couldn't afford to miss it.
Oh my goodness! Are you okay?
Anna stiffened. She recognized that soft, fluttery voice, and she wanted nothing to do with it. She walked away from it as if she hadn't heard, pulling her cloak tighter. Maybe if she moved fast enough...
Wait!
With the soft flap of wings, Fluttershy landed in front of her. Her long pink mane had been tied up into a messy bun, and she was wearing a white apron with faded red stains worn into the fabric.
Your bandages need to be... Oh.
Anna grimaced as Fluttershy finally recognized her.
Don't worry, I'll find someone else.
Fluttershy took a deep breath and gave a firm shake of her head.
No, your bandages are already soaked through. Come with me, please. Look, I really don't have time to...
Anna sighed as the Pegasus grabbed her hoof, hauling her off to an unoccupied bedroll. Anna tried to pull her hoof free, but the mare had a grip like iron.
That's okay.
Fluttershy gave Anna a small smile as she began to prod at her wounds with her other hoof.
I can be quick. Undress, please.
Anna wanted to protest further, but there was something in the mare's tone that had her complying almost before she realized. She sighed as she shrugged her cloak off and then her satchel, weighed down with her arcata and the food she'd taken from Titus's camp. Next came the straps of her freshly mended vest, revealing her coal gray coat and the soiled cloth already coming loose around her wounds. It would probably be quicker if she just shut up and let Fluttershy work. She certainly didn't seem to be as hesitant or fidgety as Anna had expected. Anna kept her eyes forward, wincing only slightly as Fluttershy began to tug the dirty cloth free.
Why are you helping me? You're hurt,
Fluttershy said.
Some pony has to, so why not me?
Anna blinked. She looked down, but Fluttershy was focused on her work.
Aren't you worried about what I'm doing? For all you know, I could be here to kill you.
Fluttershy hummed quietly as she bundled the spent bandages up and set them aside before grabbing a small cloth, dipping it into a nearby bucket of water, and began to dab at Anna's shoulder.
Is that what you're here for?
Anna snorted.
If I were, I wouldn't tell you, and I'd wait for you to finish healing me before I did anything.
Fluttershy paused. She pulled her cloth back, squeezing the collected blood out into the dirt before draping it over the bucket. She looked up, meeting Anna's gaze with a stern frown.
Anna, what you do is wrong.
Anna stiffened. Those hard blue eyes held her in place with as much steel as any shackle. Where did this cold fire come from? Where was the shivering Pegasus that had been willing to do anything she asked without resistance, even if it meant carrying her own friends into a bounty hunter's cell? She felt an uncomfortable twinge in her gut.
You hurt so many innocent ponies,
Fluttershy continued.
My friends saved your life, put their trust in you, and you repaid them with violence. That's not very fair to them, is it?
Anna's jaw tightened. Was she being lectured now? Like some unruly foal?
You wouldn't understand.
Fluttershy sighed.
Maybe I wouldn't. But if you're willing to talk, I'm willing to listen.
Anna cocked her head, taken aback by the sincerity in the mare's voice.
Is she actually asking me for an explanation? What is she playing at?
Fluttershy grabbed the cloth back out of the bucket, wringing the water from it with both hooves.
Could you lie back, please? I need to clean the wound on your belly.
After a moment's hesitation, Anna complied, lying on her back so the Pegasus could gently scrub at the gunshot wound on her barrel. Fluttershy began to hum once more, cleaning the wound with soft but firm pressure. Anna took it all in with a thoughtful frown. How could the same mare who had been shaming her seconds ago now tend her wounds as if she were some filly with a scraped fetlock, and not a lying monster that had betrayed those she held most dear without remorse? Anna felt a knot form in her chest, and it wasn't from her wounds. The Countess had made her that beautiful dress even in spite of her resistance, and even if Pinky had been annoying at times, they had both always taken her side whenever someone had looked down on her for what she was. They had been kind to her. They'd been stupidly kind, and she had made sure they paid for it because kindness like that couldn't be real. It had to be a lie. Some facade erected in service of selfish pursuits. And so Anna had lied back without hesitation. But now, as Anna listened to the quiet, content melody of Fluttershy's voice, she had to wonder. Maybe it was all real. Maybe she was lying to the only honest ponies in Equestria.
I'm helping your friends.
Fluttershy wrung the bloodied water from the cloth and set it aside, grabbing a roll of fresh gauze.
That's why I'm here.
Anna said. It felt odd to tell the truth without any prompting, for its own sake.
I'm going back into the city to help them stop the siege. Oh. Well, that's good to hear.
Anna's frown persisted.
She believes me? Just like that?
Surely she should ask some questions, ask for proof, at least pry for more details to try and catch Anna out in a lie, but no. She just kept humming, smiling as she applied a dressing to Anna's wound and wrapped her barrel tightly in the gauze. Anna said nothing as Fluttershy did the same to the wound on her shoulder before helping her back to her hooves. She didn't even complain when the Pegasus helped her don her clothes or stuffed a few more dressings into her satchel. At last, Fluttershy stepped back, giving her a warm smile.
Is there anything else you need?
Anna's mouth hung open for a few seconds before she found her voice.
No, thank you. Oh!
Fluttershy started, eyes widening.
I actually had a letter I wrote for my friends yesterday, but I couldn't find any pony to deliver it for me. If you're going back into the city, maybe you could do me a favor?
She looked around and flipped the flap open on a pair of saddlebags lying off to the side. She pulled a letter out, holding it up with a blush.
If that's okay with you?
Anna shook her head.
You shouldn't trust me with that. Why not? You said you're helping them, right? Yes, but...
Anna stomped a hoof, raising her voice in anger.
You shouldn't trust me!
Fluttershy flinched back with a startled squeak, dropping her letter.
But... No!
A pair of passing nurses shot them a watchful glare, so Anna lowered her voice into a sharp hiss.
Ponies that trust me get hurt, okay? And if I don't hurt you, I'll hurt someone you care about. I am a liar, Fluttershy. Everything I've ever told your friends, all of it was a lie meant to get them to let their guard down. I could be doing the same to you right now.
Fluttershy actually smiled.
You could be. But I think ponies deserve second chances.
She straightened up, picking the letter up and holding it out again.
If you take this letter, then you won't have to lie the next time you see my friends. It might be hard, but I'm sure they'd forgive you too.
Anna slapped the letter away with a snarl.
If they did, it would only put them in more danger. You can deliver it yourself when the siege is lifted.
Anna turned away sharply, but not before she caught a glimpse of the disappointment on Fluttershy's face. She rushed out of the tent before the Pegasus could say another word. White powder drifted past her vision as she stepped out into the wind.
Stupid pony. If she wants to get herself killed, she can do it without me.
She found a relatively sheltered spot next to a smith's tent, and she allowed herself several minutes to indulge in a small lunch of dry bread and cider. It wasn't a particularly flavorful meal, and her thoughts lingered on this strange conversation as she ate. She had faced ponies she had betrayed before, and they always greeted her with spite and disdain. She had learned to laugh off the hatred of ponies at a young age, and she found comfort in the knowledge that she could rely on herself and her sister. The world was always against them. That was just the way things were. But forgiveness? It didn't fit into her reality. Even if a pony had never met her, they would know that forgiving her would only be an invitation for further exploitation. There were a few exceptions, yes, but they always learned quickly. Anna made certain of that. She should have accepted the letter. She could have read it, maybe gleaned some useful information, and she could have used it to regain the Countess's trust. It would have been the smart thing to do, and she always prided herself on being the smart sister. But this time the smart decision only filled her with disgust. She shook her head, pushing the thoughts away and focusing on her meal. By the time she finished, she felt like herself again. Cool, confident, and ready to spin the perfect lie at a moment's notice. The camp had grown agitated since her arrival, with troops cantering in every direction in armored columns. She fell in behind a squad clad in full sets of tarnished plate, short shoulder capes emblazoned with the image of a snarling dog. The barons were staging for an attack on the city, and one that would hopefully be more successful than the few frontal assaults attempted in the early days of the siege. There was a buzz of tense confusion hanging in the air, and Anna couldn't help but grin as she overheard a few soldiers muttering among themselves, questioning why the attack had been moved up a day. It had been planned for tomorrow, but Anna's arrival had changed that. The messenger that Titus had sent along with her had been very helpful. Within a few minutes, the squad she was following arrived at a wide hole that had been dug into the ground, the walls reinforced with strong beams of wood. The hole led to a steeply sloped tunnel, and the armored ponies were forced to slow their pace as they descended single file, taking each step with caution. Anna followed with patience as the tunnel delved deeper and deeper still, until the only light came from the lamp held in the teeth of the sergeant leading the group. The darkness didn't bother her. Her slitted eyes could see even in the dim light, picking out the wooden reinforcements holding the dirt walls up as the slope leveled off. Anna could hear the collective breath of relief from the soldiers as she followed them, the tunnel just narrow enough that she couldn't fully spread her wings. The air was thick and hot, and within seconds Anna could feel sweat beginning to build on her coat, matting the hairs into uncomfortable clumps. She could only imagine what it must be like wearing the heavy metal barding of the soldiers, but if the sound of their strained breath was any indication, it must have felt like walking through Tartarus. She wasn't very familiar with siege warfare, but Countess Silky had given her a quick primer on the subject. It was obvious that any assault across the field surrounding the city, exposed to the devastating fire of the Frieslanders, would be a disastrous failure. While the Baronlanders had kept up a token skirmishing force on the surface, the majority of their effort had been focused here, in the tunnels, where teams of sappers had worked day and night, fighting to close the gap between the army and its objective from underground. The tunnel seemed to turn almost at random, sometimes sloping up or down for brief spans before leveling off again. Anna could only assume that they were still going mostly west, even only able to go forwards or back. She felt like she could get lost down here. Her ears twitched at the sound of muted conversation ahead, and the tunnel widened out into a small chamber. A pair of sweaty, bare-coated stallions were squeezed up against one wall, greeting them with tired grins. "You're just in time, lads," one said. "Charge goes in 10. You lot get right, line up and ready." The tunnel split into 5 breaches, and the sergeant in front led the squad down the rightmost path. After perhaps another minute of walking, they came to a stop, bunching up and going from single file to a cramped double column. Anna leaned side to side, but it was impossible to see the front of the formation past the bulk of the armored soldiers, and the tunnel was too short for her to climb or fly up higher. "Soldiers!" The sergeant was barely audible from the back of the formation, her voice muffled by the bodies in her way. "Are you ready to bring glory to your lord under Celestia's light?" The shouted response was almost deafening in the enclosed space. "Aye, Sergeant!" "Are you ready to strike fear in the hearts of the soft Frieslanders, to watch them wet their fancy blue coats when they realize they ain't got their big guns to save them?" "Aye, Sergeant!" "Remember the plan. Stay close to me. We will be the spearhead that clears the way for all of Altalusia to bleed into this city, and when the bards and minstrels write their songs of this siege, they will sing of Count Dane Steel Hussars." Anna's ear twitched at a faint hissing sound. A shout echoed up the tunnel from behind them. "The fuse is lit!" The tunnel fell silent. Every soldier seemed to hold their breath as the spitting hiss of the fuse faded into the distance. Anna glanced to her satchel, considering equipping her Arcata, but deciding against it. There would be hundreds of bluecoats between her and the rest of the city, and she wouldn't get past them with force. A rumble shook through the earth, and Anna flinched at the silt that rained from above. A second later, the rumble was joined by two more, and she had to brace herself on the wall to keep steady. There was a deep, shuddering crack from ahead. Sunlight streamed into the tunnel, filtered through a thick cloud of dust, and with a mighty roar and the thunder of galloping hooves, the soldiers streamed out into the open air. Adrenaline surged through Anna's veins as she followed, squinting past the sudden glare that struck her when she clambered past the shattered lip of the tunnel. A wide section of the city's lower outer wall had collapsed, disappearing in a cloud of snow and dirt along with all the soldiers and cannons that had rested atop it. Shouts of alarm competed with screams of pain, and although she could see a few more veteran bluecoats barking orders or shoving cannons into position, most of the Friesland troops simply looked on in open-mouthed shock as dozens of armored Baron Landers scrambled out of the earth, bellowing throaty war cries and charging up the rubble towards the still-standing walls. The bluecoats stood little chance. A few scattered shots was their only protest as the steel-bound invaders trampled them underhoof, racing to claim as much of the wall as they could before an effective resistance could be rallied. Baron soldiers with small swivel cannons mounted on their backs followed in their wake, teams of two working as one to support the shock troops with deadly cannon fire. Still others charged past the wall, into the streets, and Anna was quick behind them. Civilians screamed as they leapt into alleys, bolted into their homes, or simply ran in mindless terror. Anna didn't follow them for long. She needed to get through the gatehouse that led deeper into the city, and she expected the sound of armored hooves pounding through the snow would only attract trouble she didn't want. She instead pulled her hood up, galloping after a group of civilians fleeing down a narrow side alley. They apparently had the same destination in mind. The crackling of gunfire echoed off the walls as the group she was following merged with another, and then one more. And soon she was hidden in a sizable crowd of panicked ponies. Columns of bluecoats marched past them in the opposite direction, and at one point they passed a firing line forming up across an intersection just as a horde of Baron soldiers came into view further down the street. Anna heard them get one volley off, but she didn't bother listening for more. Finally, the gatehouse came into view. Two large wooden doors set into the towering inner Friesland wall and protected by small towers jutting out on either side. A few bluecoats were directing traffic, ushering fleeing civilians in one side while troops streamed out the other.
Odd,
Anna thought.
Why are there so many soldiers inside the inner wall?
She would have expected most of the garrison to be posted on the outer wall, ready to repel any assault, with only a small force left back to operate the cannons and police the city. It didn't matter to her either way. She kept her head down as she crossed under the shadow of the gatehouse, and a wave of relief passed over her as she slipped through the gates. She could have collapsed right there. She was back in the city, and the hard part was over. But if she was going to collapse anywhere, it was going to be in the cheap tavern room she shared with her sister, and she didn't want to be disturbed for a long time after. The print shop where Whitehorn had told her to leave packages was practically across the city from here. She couldn't fly, and she was already sore from her wounds, so she opted to make for the officer's home where she knew he was staying instead. If he had a problem with it, she did not care. To her surprise, there was still a soldier stationed outside the home, looking nervously up and down the street as squads of bluecoats ran past him. She paid him no mind as she circled around the back of the house, hidden away in a shaded alley. She grit her teeth as she climbed up to the window of Whitehorn's room, pulled a hoof back, and rapped against the window panes. They flew open almost instantly, and she found herself staring at Whitehorn's blue-eyed glare. "What are you doing here?"
Special delivery.
Anna grunted as she swung through the window, ignoring his protests.
Hope you don't mind.
I very much do mind. Whitehorn said, following her with his head. We cannot be connected.
You know what? I honestly don't even care right now.
Anna flipped her satchel open, dumping the papers inside onto the floor. The seal bounced against the stone with a dull thud.
I hope this is enough writing because I am not going back.
He narrowed his eyes, looking down to her bandages. Were you caught?
No, I shot myself for fun.
Whitehorn's tail flicked out behind him. Anatami, my plan does not work if ponies know the seal's been stolen. Anna rolled her eyes.
Too bad. For what it's worth, I don't think anyone knows what I took, but I wouldn't sit on that seal too long. And I don't need any smart talk from you. I must have dodged the entire Friesland army out there.
I had every confidence in you. Whitehorn smirked as he sat down and picked up one of the scrolls. This should be enough. Though you may already be too late.
Again? Don't care.
Anna made for the window.
Nobody would shed a tear if all your plots suddenly sunk into the sea.
My only plot right now concerns saving the life of Countess Rarity. Anna stiffened. The Countess was in danger? She opened her mouth to ask for details, but changed her mind at the last moment. Why should she care?
I do have one request for you before I go.
Whitehorn laughed. That's not how our contract works. Her lip curled back at his dismissive tone, but she didn't challenge him on it.
I threatened the mayor while I was out, and she didn't listen. I need you to follow through on that threat.
And why would I do that? Whitehorn asked, flattening a scroll out on a metal chest he seemed to be using as a desk.
Considering I'm working for you, my threats are your threats. And what was it you said about threats only being as good as the enforcement?
Anna shrugged.
I suppose if you don't want ponies taking your agents seriously.
Whitehorn snorted. What is it?
One of the writing samples I took is a short story written by Nettlecus's scribe. I need you to publish it.
Whitehorn paused. He looked up, meeting her gaze. You threatened to publish an author's work?
It'll make more sense once you read it.
Anna winked as she climbed back out the window.
If you need me anytime in the next several days, I hope you don't find me.
She dropped back down into the alley with a grunt, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. She had a too long walk ahead of her, but the thought of seeing Gava again made it almost bearable.